The sun had barely broken over the skyline when Eliza Parker first felt it, that gnawing tug of unease. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a soft, persistent hum, like static in the background of a carefully curated life. She sat at their breakfast nook, sipping the dark roast she'd ground fresh that morning, scanning real estate listings for clients. Daniel, immaculate as always in his tailored loungewear, scrolled through his phone beside her, murmuring something about moving the wedding date up. Spring instead of fall. A vineyard in Sonoma. Romance in bloom. It should have made her smile. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us, but also contributes to spreading value to the community. If you find this content useful, don't forget to watch the whole video, like, subscribe, and share with someone you think needs to hear this too. But Eliza's gaze lingered on her laptop screen. Her hands paused over the keyboard. Something didn't feel right. "Why the rush?" she asked casually, trying not to betray the flutter in her chest. Daniel smiled that practiced, dazzling smile, the one that had first captivated her at a gallery opening 3 years earlier. "I just can't wait to start our life together, Eliza. And the venue you loved still has a spring opening." He returned to his screen, fingers dancing across the glass. But Eliza wasn't looking at wedding venues anymore. She was looking at something far less romantic: bank alerts. It had started the night before. While Daniel was supposedly at a client dinner, she'd received a string of small, odd bank notifications. Tiny transactions, just a few dollars each. But to Eliza, a seasoned real estate attorney who specialized in historic property law, these weren't random charges. They were tests, the kind that usually precede large withdrawals or unauthorized access. And she hadn't initiated any of them. Her instincts, honed over years of high-stakes negotiations and uncovering real estate fraud, snapped to attention. Her pulse raced, though her face remained calm. "I'm meeting Caroline for lunch," she announced, closing her laptop with a soft click. Daniel barely looked up. "Perfect. I've got some investor calls anyway." He leaned in to kiss her forehead. She smiled, just like she'd been trained to do. The same expression she wore when outmaneuvering arrogant developers in the courtroom. The one that said nothing's wrong. Nothing at all. But inside, Eliza's mind was already racing. Caroline wasn't expecting her. In fact, Eliza wasn't going to lunch at all. By 11 a.m., she was parked discreetly a block away from her childhood home, a breathtaking Victorian in Presidio Heights passed down by her grandmother. It had taken Eliza years of savings and late nights spent poring over architectural blueprints to restore the home to its original splendor. Now, she stared through the zoom lens of her phone's camera, hands trembling slightly. Strangers were exiting her house, and standing beside them, pointing out the stained glass windows as if they were his own creation, was Vanessa Reynolds, one of the city's top luxury real estate agents. Her red manicured fingers gestured toward the handcrafted mahogany entryway, a detail only someone deeply familiar with the home would know. Eliza's stomach twisted. She captured photo after photo. This was the third showing this week, according to the hidden security system Daniel didn't know existed. Her house was being sold out from under her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Michael, her trusted investigator. Records confirmed. Transfer of deed filed yesterday. Signature verification in progress. Eliza stared at the screen, her reflection mirrored in the windshield, sharp, composed, unreadable. But inside, her world was crumbling. The Victorian wasn't just her property. It was her legacy. The first place she'd ever called home. The reason she'd pursued law. The foundation of everything she'd built. And Daniel, her fiancé, had forged her signature and was in the process of selling it to a developer. A man she loved was systematically erasing her life. As she pulled away from the curb, fury building beneath her ribcage, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about money. Something far more elaborate and sinister was unraveling. And Eliza Parker wasn't going to sit back and watch it happen. She was going to fight. And Daniel Mercer had no idea who he'd just betrayed. Eliza Parker had once believed that betrayal came with warning signs, slamming doors, angry voices, nights spent apart. But in her case, it arrived softly, in the form of digital deception and signatures that looked like her own. The Victorian in Presidio Heights was more than just an address. It was the home where Eliza had taken her first steps, where her grandmother had taught her the value of preservation, of honoring what came before. It was the reason she'd become a real estate attorney. And now it was being shown to strangers like a commodity on a spreadsheet. Back in her car, the photos she'd taken of Vanessa Reynolds and the potential buyers burned on her screen. Vanessa's tailored suit, her confident gestures, Eliza recognized the glint of a deal in motion. She knew that look. She'd worn it herself in hundreds of closings. Except this wasn't just any deal. It was hers.
Her phone buzzed again.
Another message from Michael. Transfer of deed occurred late yesterday. Filed under Hamilton and Knox Trust. Signature was digitally submitted. Verification underway. Eliza's mouth went dry. Hamilton and Knox. That wasn't just any shell company. It was a name she'd encountered before, in fraud cases involving historic homes. And now her name was tied to it, without her consent. The worst part? The signature. Michael included a scan. It looked exactly like hers. Every loop, every angle. But Eliza had never signed that form. She was meticulous. She knew every document she touched. This wasn't just coincidence. This was theft. She didn't go home. Not yet. She drove straight to the courthouse, where her godmother, Judge Eleanor Montgomery, held chambers. Within minutes, she was seated across from the woman who had mentored her through law school, guided her through her first case, and always warned her. The most dangerous predators wear perfect smiles. Eliza laid out the evidence, the fake signature, the sudden shift in Daniel's urgency to marry, the bank alerts, the property showings. Eleanor's sharp eyes never left the pages. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. This is forgery. Possibly aggravated identity theft. Eliza nodded, her hands curled into fists on her lap. He has access to everything. My IDs, passwords, encrypted signature keys. I trusted him with all of it. Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temple. And he's using it to dismantle you. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual rhythm, but Eliza felt a storm forming just beneath the surface of her skin. She wasn't just being robbed. She was being erased. Michael's next message confirmed her worst fear. Offshore account identified. Transfers date back 8 months. Other properties possibly involved. Meeting at 4 o'clock to review full findings. Eliza's grip tightened on the phone. Daniel wasn't just trying to sell her home. He was in the process of stealing her entire life, piece by piece, wrapped in polite smiles and soft lies. And he almost got away with it. She drove back to their shared condo in a fog of rage and disbelief, pausing just long enough to wipe the emotion off her face before stepping through the door. Daniel greeted her with a kiss, warm and casual. How was lunch with Caroline? Perfect, she replied with the mask she'd worn so many times in court. We did some bridal window shopping too. He smiled. That's great. I had some updates on the Henderson deal. Maybe we can talk later? She nodded, her stomach turning. The Henderson estate. Another valuable property she was managing. He'd mentioned it casually over breakfast, just before suggesting a spring wedding. Eliza walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, her engagement ring suddenly heavy on her finger. Every step she took in that apartment, their apartment, felt like walking through a set built for someone else's life. She couldn't believe it had come to this. For months, Daniel had smiled across dinner tables, held her hand during late-night walks, kissed her forehead in quiet moments. And all the while, he'd been forging documents, opening offshore accounts, and showing her grandmother's beloved home to buyers. She stopped in front of his office, the one room in their home that had always remained private. Investment privacy, he'd called it. Now she knew better. She turned, whispering to herself, "He's selling my legacy, like it's just another transaction." But Daniel Mercer had made one fatal mistake. He chose the wrong woman to deceive. Eliza Parker wasn't just a trusting fiancé. She was a seasoned attorney, a fighter, And he was about to learn just how dangerous it was to steal from someone who knew how to take it all back, legally, strategically, and without mercy. Investigator, uncovering Daniel's history of targeting successful women for fraud. By the time Eliza reached Michael Chen's private office suite at precisely 4 p.m., the polished calm of the day had fractured into something darker, a quiet warpath. The building was unassuming, nestled between a boutique design firm and a silent law library. But inside, this was where secrets unraveled. Michael Chen wasn't your average investigator. A former digital forensics expert for the FBI, he now worked exclusively with high-profile clients who needed discretion and precision, especially those entangled in sophisticated financial crimes. Eliza had trusted him for years on her most delicate cases. But this time, the target wasn't a corrupt developer or a fraudulent trust. It was her fiancé. "Thank you for coming," Michael greeted her with a firm handshake and a nod. "I wish it were under better circumstances." She didn't smile. "Show me everything." Without wasting a second, Michael tapped his keyboard, and a half-dozen screens lit up around them. Lines of code, financial records, digital signatures, timestamps, and shell company structures. "Eliza," he began, his voice measured, "Daniel Mercer has been building this con for almost a year. He didn't start with your Victorian. He started with your trust." A chill raced down her spine. Michael brought up a timeline on one screen. 10 months ago, he cloned your digital signature. Just after Christmas. Around the time you introduced him to your family, and right after the engagement. Eliza blinked, stunned. He used the proposal to gain deeper access. Michael nodded grimly. He's been siphoning bits of information ever since. Email metadata, scanned forms, even keystroke logs. And now he's escalated to asset transfers. She sank into the chair beside him, her arms crossed tightly. "Shell companies in Delaware and Nevada," he continued. "At least 4 so far. They're layered, purposefully hard to trace, but they all link back to transactions connected to your properties." On the screen, a dizzying flowchart appeared. Money moved from one account to another, masked beneath false names and encrypted strings. But Michael had cracked through it like a surgeon with a scalpel. "And here," he said, switching tabs, "are 2 other women he's done this to." The screen filled with files. Ellen Whitaker, Boston. Rebecca Chambers, Chicago. Eliza's stomach dropped. Both were successful. Ellen had been a partner at a top architecture firm. Rebecca, a senior executive with a Fortune 500 company. Both owned high-value real estate. Both were single when they met Daniel. Both had fallen for the charming, polished man who swept into their lives with perfect timing and expensive taste. And both had lost nearly everything. Ellen had a breakdown, Michael said, pulling up her case file. Resigned from her firm. Declared bankruptcy. Eliza's jaw clenched. Rebecca fought back legally, but Daniel had covered his tracks. The documentation was too good. She lost her home, her savings, even her art collection. It wasn't just a pattern. It was a methodology, a predatory algorithm cloaked in charm. He tailors each con, Michael explained. Learns his target's vulnerabilities. Studies them. Then strikes. "And me?" Eliza asked quietly. "You're the perfect mark," Michael replied with a painful honesty. Successful, private, owns multiple properties. Controls high-value estates with confidential client data. And, perhaps most importantly, he turned toward her, expression serious. "You trusted him completely." Silence thickened in the room. She looked at the evidence on the screens, her own financial history, mirrored and stolen. Her name signed on forms she had never seen. Her Victorian, vanishing from the public record. Eliza swallowed hard. "This isn't just fraud." Michael nodded.
No.
"It's criminal enterprise. And now, we have enough to move." But Eliza shook her head. "Not yet." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You want to wait?" "I want to understand the full extent of it," she said firmly. "I want to know every name, every signature, every dollar he's touched. And I want to know who's helping him." Her voice hardened. Because Daniel didn't forge those documents alone. Someone filed them. Someone notarized them. Someone is standing beside him, holding the door while he empties my life. Michael tapped a few keys. There's one more thing. He pulled up a surveillance feed from earlier that day. The video played silently. Daniel, in a tailored suit, was giving a personal tour of the Victorian to Vanessa Reynolds, the real estate agent, and an older man Michael identified as Julian Hargrove, a known developer notorious for gutting historic homes and flipping them into soulless luxury condos. Eliza watched as Daniel pointed to the glasswork, the wood paneling, even the ivy-clad windows her grandmother once adored. He moved with the ease of ownership, as though the home had always been his. Eliza's eyes narrowed. He wasn't just stealing her house. He was selling her heritage. And if he thought she'd just walk away quietly, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Eliza Parker leaned closer to the screen, eyes fixed on the names Ellen Whitaker and Rebecca Chambers. Each file Michael Chin opened told a story, not in words or photos, but in the cold geometry of stolen funds, digital signatures, falsified deeds, and legal collapse. The more she saw, the more the elegant puzzle of Daniel Mercer's life came undone. This, Michael said, pulling up a digital trail of documents, is how it started with Ellen. The screen displayed a photo of Ellen, early 40s, poised and confident in her architectural firm's promotional shot. She'd been a rising star in Boston's preservationist scene, winning awards for restoring historic landmarks until Daniel Mercer entered her life. He met her at an art benefit. Posed as a venture capitalist with an interest in sustainable development, Michael explained. Within 6 months, he'd moved into her condo. By month 12, they were engaged. 2 months later, the condo was sold, and the proceeds transferred through shell accounts straight to Daniel. Eliza swallowed, sickened. What happened to her? She tried to fight, hired forensic auditors, took him to court. Michael tapped through pages of testimony. But the documentation Daniel used? Bulletproof. Signatures matched. Notarizations were in place. Emails faked. Digital breadcrumbs carefully planted. And the result? She lost everything. Reputation ruined. Clients pulled out. She stepped down from her firm and disappeared from the professional world. Last I traced her, she was living out of state, under her maiden name. Eliza's hands trembled. And Rebecca? Michael opened the next file. Rebecca Chambers, Chicago, executive at a financial firm. Daniel met her at a leadership summit. Same pattern. Charismatic entrance. Slow, methodical access to her finances. Stole not only her condo, but her private art collection, some pieces worth over $1 million. Eliza's breath caught. And no one stopped him? Not in time. The only reason Rebecca didn't suffer Ellen's fate was that she uncovered a few irregularities. Too late to save everything, but enough to start a civil suit. Still, Daniel had already laundered most of the funds. He settled out of court with minimal penalties and disappeared from Chicago completely. He's done this twice already, Eliza whispered, and now it's happening again.
To me.
No, Michael corrected her, voice steady. Now it's different. Because this time, you're not alone. Eliza sat back in her chair, mind racing. The pattern was undeniable. Daniel wasn't impulsive. He was deliberate. A predator who studied his targets, built trust, and erased them financially before vanishing into the next city, the next woman, the next scam. But Eliza Parker wasn't going to be another collapsed name in a sealed file. She wasn't going to disappear. She was going to end him. And not just Daniel, everyone helping him. Michael flipped to a final screen, displaying a network of corporate entities and transactions. He always builds redundancy. Multiple shell companies, often linked through dummy trusts. This time, we found 3, Harper and Dunn, Knox River Holdings, and a new one, Dandridge Capital. Guess where the proceeds from your Victorian are being routed? Let me guess, Eliza said coldly. Dandridge. Correct. Michael adjusted the display, revealing transaction logs. But here's the kicker. The person processing most of the legal paperwork? Timothy Reynolds. The name hit Eliza like a brick. Vanessa Reynolds' husband? Michael nodded. Partner at Brennan and White. Prestigious firm. He's been quietly funneling Daniel's transactions through his paralegal access. Avoid scrutiny by keeping everything under the radar. Of course, Eliza muttered. She shows the house. He files the paperwork. Daniel collects the profit. It was an assembly line of theft. 3 perfect cogs, she said aloud. Each one polished, professional, and utterly fraudulent. Michael leaned forward. I think it's time we break the machine. Eliza stared at the screen again. Ellen's drained accounts. Rebecca's lawsuit. Her own forged signature. 3 successful women targeted for the same reason. They had something Daniel could steal. But unlike the others, Eliza had something else. Leverage. She had connections. A godmother who sat on a federal bench. An investigator who could slice through digital camouflage. And now the knowledge of exactly how Daniel operated. She stood slowly, her reflection visible in the window behind the screens. He thinks I'm just another victim, she said. He has no idea what's coming. Michael looked up. What's the next step? Her lips curved into a quiet, icy smile. We let him think he's still winning. Just long enough for me to bury him with the truth. Eliza Parker had built her career navigating the complexities of real estate law. She'd negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, unraveled forged deeds, and protected century-old properties from greedy developers. But nothing in her career, nothing, had prepared her for this. Because Daniel Mercer wasn't just a con man. He was part of something bigger, much bigger. As she sat across from Michael Chun, eyes glued to the tangled web of transactions now displayed on the monitors, a sickening realization settled in her chest. This isn't just identity theft, she whispered. It's organized crime. Michael nodded grimly. You're looking at an international laundering network. And Daniel is a key player. He clicked to a new screen, revealing a spiderweb of offshore accounts stretching across the globe, Cayman Islands, Singapore, Liechtenstein. The transactions looked like digital sleight of hand, each move carefully obscured behind dummy corporations and blind trusts. But to a trained investigator like Michael, the pattern was clear. Dandridge Capital is a front, he explained, and the account it's funneling to belongs to Armin Kazarian. Eliza's blood ran cold. She'd heard that name before. Whispers in legal circles. Rumors traded between prosecutors and private investigators. Kazarian was a ghost with a reputation, the kind of figure who moved millions behind the scenes while remaining untouchable. His alleged involvement ranged from securities fraud to weapons trafficking. And now, Daniel was funneling her money, her family's legacy, straight into his hands. So Daniel's not just stealing from women, she murmured. He's helping clean dirty money for someone far more dangerous. Michael confirmed with a nod. And he's done it multiple times. He selects women with real estate portfolios, drains them slowly, filters the proceeds through luxury property transactions, then routes the money overseas. Eliza's mouth went dry. She hadn't just been betrayed by a lover. She had unknowingly been used as a financial conduit for international crime. And the Victorian? She asked. Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up a recent sales document. Set to be flipped into a luxury condo by Julian Hargrove. But the sale's just a cover. The real purpose is asset conversion. It allows Kazarian's dirty funds to be legitimized once the property is sold to a shell buyer. Eliza exhaled shakily, pressing her fingertips to her temples. 3 years of my life, she whispered. 3 years he studied me, used me, lied to me for this. Michael's voice softened. He didn't count on you fighting back. She looked up, her expression sharpening. No, he didn't. She turned to the monitor, where a passport skin flickered across the screen. Daniel's under an alias. James Rowland. Multiple identities. Multiple countries. A carefully crafted persona for every mark. Why didn't the other women stop him? She asked. Michael's answer was quiet but cutting. Because he made sure they couldn't. Ellen was emotionally destroyed. Rebecca was buried in litigation. And neither of them had what you have. What's that? Eliza asked. Michael looked her square in the eyes. Power. Knowledge. And allies in the right places. It was true. Her godmother was Judge Eleanor Montgomery, respected federal judge with the authority to initiate sweeping legal action. She had close ties in both the district attorney's office and Treasury Department. And Michael, with his FBI background, had already started briefing key officials in finance crimes. Now, everything would change, because Daniel's con wasn't just a private betrayal, it was a federal offense. And Eliza had the proof. She stood, pacing the room as her mind whirled. "How much is he moving?" she asked. Michael turned back to the spreadsheet. "Over $14.2 million that we've confirmed. Likely more once we trace the remaining shell entities." Eliza stopped cold. $14 million, she repeated. Michael added, "And if the Henderson estate closing and Westbrook litigation go through, that number could rise to $35 million in liquid assets." That was the moment the full scale of the conspiracy hit her. Daniel wasn't running from woman to woman for pleasure or validation. He was building a criminal empire, one signature at a time. He had weaponized relationships, weaponized trust, and now he was trying to launder millions right under the noses of federal regulators. But he had made a critical mistake. He underestimated the woman he targeted. Eliza turned back to Michael, her voice low but resolute. "It's time to bring in Eleanor." Michael smiled slightly. "Already sent her a briefing file. She's calling in a task force." Eliza picked up her bag, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor.
"Good," she said.
"Because this isn't just about justice anymore. This is about bringing down everyone he works with and ensuring they never get the chance to do it again." As she left Michael's office, the fog of confusion and heartbreak was gone. In its place was something colder, stronger. Strategy.
Focus.
Vengeance. And Daniel Mercer? He had no idea just how close his world was to falling apart. Eliza Parker sat in the quiet of her parked car, hands wrapped around the steering wheel, as the pieces snapped into place like the final move in a rigged chess game. Vanessa Reynolds. Timothy Reynolds. Husband and wife. Real estate and legal muscle. They weren't just minor players in Daniel's betrayal. They were central to the entire scheme. Michael Chun had sent over the last round of evidence just minutes earlier. Digital trails, call logs, encrypted emails. Together, they painted a damning picture. Vanessa acting as the polished front for the property sales, while Timothy, a paralegal at the prestigious Brennan and White firm, quietly processed forged deeds and fabricated power of attorney documents behind closed doors. They weren't just helping Daniel. They were his co-conspirators. And they'd been in Eliza's world for months, if not years, without ever raising suspicion. She remembered the first time she'd met Vanessa. It was at a charity gala. Vanessa, dripping in diamonds, all charm and sophistication, had asked Eliza for her opinion on historic zoning reforms. She'd smiled warmly, even complimented Eliza on her work in preserving San Francisco's architectural heritage. Now, the same woman was hosting open houses in Eliza's family home.
Selling it.
Smiling.
Profiting.
She felt the burn rise in her chest as she imagined Vanessa gesturing through the hallways her grandmother once paced in slippers and robes. The thought of strangers being lured in by the smell of staged candles and catered hors d'oeuvres in her house made her fists clench. And Timothy, quiet, polite Timothy, whom Eliza had seen in passing at legal mixers. The man who blended into the background with his soft voice and organized folders, now revealed to be a master of forged documentation. According to Michael's report, Timothy had processed over a dozen fraudulent property transfers in the last 4 years. Most of them involving women eerily similar to Eliza, wealthy, professional, and isolated in terms of legal oversight. Women whose portfolios made them valuable and whose trust made them vulnerable. Eliza inhaled sharply, fighting the emotion crawling up her throat. "They targeted us," she whispered. "Handpicked us." She pulled out her phone and dialed Michael. "They're moving fast," he said as soon as he picked up. "I've intercepted communication between Daniel and Vanessa. He's pushing to finalize all document processing this week. It's clear he's preparing for an exit." Eliza's jaw tightened. "They're rushing because they know something's wrong. They're trying to get ahead of it." "They're panicking," Michael agreed. "And panicked people make mistakes." A dangerous thought surfaced. If we push them further, she said, her voice low and steady, we might be able to catch them all red-handed. There was silence on the line for a beat. You're serious? Michael asked. You want to bait them? I want to trap them, Eliza corrected. Daniel. Vanessa.
Timothy.
Anyone else hiding behind a signature or a company name. If they want to finish this deal, let's let them try. Michael paused, then spoke with a thread of admiration in his voice. Then we'll need to move fast. And quietly. Eliza ended the call and leaned back in her seat, staring at the windshield as rain began to tap softly against the glass. She was no longer the woman who had been fooled by a smile and a diamond ring. She was a legal strategist. She was a daughter of a judicial legacy. She was a woman with the full weight of the law and a growing team of allies behind her. And Vanessa and Timothy Reynolds? They had just made a fatal miscalculation. They hadn't just tried to rob her. They'd done so while leaving fingerprints in every corner of their operation, from falsified notary stamps to offshore wire transfers. They thought she was going to crumble under the weight of betrayal. They didn't realize she was just getting started. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us, but also contributes to spreading value to the community. If you find this content useful, don't forget to watch the whole video, like, subscribe, and share with someone you think needs to hear this too. Eliza Parker returned home that evening wearing a mask as carefully constructed as any legal argument she'd ever drafted. Daniel was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, pouring wine with a smile that would have disarmed anyone who didn't know what she now did. But Eliza wasn't fooled anymore. Not by the dinner he prepared. Not by the soft jazz humming in the background. Not by the way he pulled her chair out, acting like the man she thought she'd loved. This was all performance. And tonight, she'd play her role to perfection. Long day? Daniel asked, watching her carefully as she slipped off her blazer and set her briefcase down. Exhausting, she replied, smoothing her hair. The Henderson estates turning into more of a headache than I expected. His eyes flickered at the mention. Just a flicker, but Eliza caught it. She sipped her wine slowly, letting the warmth coat her throat while her mind stayed cold and focused. What Daniel didn't know was that earlier that day, she'd sat in a sealed federal conference room with Judge Eleanor Montgomery, Special Agent Rivera from the Treasury Department, and Michael Chen, reviewing everything they had. Every forged signature, every account, every accomplice. They'd pieced together the blueprint of Daniel's operation, a scheme so refined it could have remained undetected for years. But Daniel made one critical mistake. He underestimated his final target. Eliza had spent years in real estate law. She'd built airtight cases, exposed fraudulent developers, and preserved historical estates from backdoor deals and silent demolitions. She knew how to hide in plain sight, and now, she was using that knowledge to dismantle Daniel's empire from the inside. You've been distracted lately, Daniel said as he plated dinner. She smiled faintly. Just a lot on my mind. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to hurl the stack of surveillance photos on the table and watch his smug smile collapse. But this wasn't the time for explosions. This was the time for precision. Over the next few days, Eliza played her part with award-worthy subtlety. She discussed spring wedding plans with manufactured excitement, even let Daniel take a photo of her holding bridal magazines for a social media post. She offered him updates on her client meetings, just enough to make it seem like she was still the trusting fiancé, oblivious to what lurked beneath his charming veneer. Meanwhile, she was coordinating with Michael to install hidden recording devices throughout their condo. Her earrings? Microphones. The decorative vase in the living room?
Camera.
The sleek pendant around her neck? A GPS beacon with encrypted audio and real-time data upload. Everything was now being monitored. Everything Daniel said was being recorded. And it worked, because Daniel had begun to slip. He started taking longer calls in his office, calls that were no longer in his usual charming tone but carried the clipped urgency of a man whose timeline was unraveling. He paced more. He drank more. He pressed for wedding details with increasing desperation. That's when Eliza knew he was scared. And fear made predators reckless. That fear came to a head 2 days later, when Daniel left for what he claimed was a last-minute investment meeting. As soon as the door shut behind him, Eliza triggered the secure signal to Michael. Within 20 minutes, a covert team entered the condo. They swept the office, the safe, the secondary laptop Daniel had hidden. What they found confirmed every suspicion: financial records linking Daniel to offshore laundering networks, encrypted messages with Vanessa and Timothy Reynolds, and a coded ledger listing several past and future victims, all selected for their financial independence and isolated personal lives. When Michael handed her the file labeled EP, Consolidation Phase, Eliza had to sit down. EP, Eliza Parker. Her name was a project title. She had been categorized, studied, and marked for liquidation. It was no longer just betrayal. It was clinical, calculated, cruel. She closed the folder with trembling hands, then stood and faced the team. "Now we finish it," she said, voice steel. "We let him think he's still in control. And when the moment's right, when he thinks he's won, we take everything." The plan was in motion. Federal agents were already monitoring Daniel's phone. The Treasury Department was flagging every transaction connected to his accounts. And Judge Montgomery had quietly frozen all activity linked to the Henderson and Westbrook properties under emergency judicial authority. By the time Daniel realized what was happening, it would be too late. Eliza didn't just want justice. She wanted total exposure. For every woman he'd targeted. For every legacy he'd tried to erase. Daniel Mercer had built a house of cards on charm, lies, and forged signatures. Now, Eliza was going to blow it down one quiet move at a time. The morning the cleaner arrived in San Francisco, Eliza Parker stood in the surveillance control room Michael had built inside the carriage house behind her Victorian home. The air inside buzzed with quiet energy. Monitors lined the walls, glowing with live feeds from every room in the house. Thermal imaging, directional microphones, and motion sensors were all active, tuned to capture even the faintest whisper. Jacob Stein just checked into the Mandarin under the alias James Smith, Michael reported, eyes on the tracker. Eliza turned toward the main screen where a blurry image slowly sharpened. A man in his early 40s, military-cut hair, steel-gray eyes. He moved with the kind of calculated precision that made everyone else seem out of place. A ghost in a city full of noise. A former intelligence officer, Michael continued. Dishonorably discharged after tampering with evidence during a black site investigation. Now a digital forensics consultant for hire. Code name in certain circles, the cleaner. Eliza's stomach twisted. And he's here for me. Michael didn't respond. He didn't have to. Stein's presence meant one thing. Daniel was preparing to erase everything. And that made him dangerous. Hours later, a black Escalade pulled up a block from Eliza's Victorian. Stein exited, did a slow walk around the perimeter, scanning with a detection device. He paused near the antique gate, unaware that just beyond the garden wall, he was being watched. "Device is outdated. Tessa," Michael's top surveillance tech, muttered. "Won't detect military-grade sensors. We're clear." At 1:55 p.m., Daniel's Tesla appeared and parked directly in front of the house he had already claimed as his own. He stepped out, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked to the door, confident, composed, completely unaware of the trap closing around him. He used a key. Linda, the assistant U.S. attorney, said quietly as the door opened. Unlawful entry confirmed. Inside, Daniel and Stein began their sweep of the property. Through the hidden mics, Eliza could hear everything. "The study first," Daniel said. "She keeps most of the legacy documents there." They moved with purpose, opening drawers, unsealing folders, and identifying original deeds, historical documentation, and property appraisals, all things that couldn't simply be erased with the click of a button. These were pieces of her family's identity, proof of generational ownership. Legacy. "She has redundant systems," Daniel explained. "Hard copies, digital backups. I want every version gone." The way he spoke, so casually, so sure, sent a chill through Eliza. Stein responded with cool efficiency, unfolding scanners, copying drives, cataloging files like a surgeon harvesting organs. They were gutting her history. Michael whispered behind her, They're moving fast. Let them. Eliza replied, eyes locked on the screen. We're recording everything. On the surveillance feeds, Daniel moved to the safe behind her grandmother's portrait, punching in the combination. How the hell did he get the code? Linda asked. Eliza's eyes narrowed. There's a glass panel on the grandfather clock across the room. If you stand at the right angle, you can see the dial. He's been watching you, Michael said grimly. For a long time. Inside the safe were the original deed to the Victorian, a hand-bound book of conservation easements, and her grandmother's personal journal from 1961, the year she'd legally fought to protect the home from demolition. Stein didn't hesitate. He bagged it all. You're sure this is everything? He asked. She mentioned no other locations, Daniel replied, but I'll check her condo later tonight. She stores client backups there. Henderson, Westbrook. If I get those, we'll be clear. Reynolds can't help anymore, Stein said flatly. He was escorted out of Brennan and White yesterday. Eliza felt a flicker of satisfaction. One domino down. Daniel's expression tightened on screen. Then I'll handle it myself. They made one final sweep, descending into the cellar where Eliza had stored generations of Parker family photos, handwritten letters, and renovation blueprints dating back to 1892.
This all goes, Daniel said.
When we're done, it should be like she never existed. Michael whispered. That's not just erasure. That's annihilation. Eliza stood frozen. Not in fear, but fury. Because now she knew this was more than theft. More than betrayal. Daniel wanted to erase her. Everything she had built. Everything she had inherited. Every memory. Every trace of her family name. Let them leave, she said. We trace every move. Every person they contact. Let them lead us to the rest. Linda nodded. Once they leave with those documents, it becomes federal transport of stolen property. As the men exited, surveillance devices tracked the placement of documents into Daniel's car. Hidden GPS beacons activated. Drones began silent aerial pursuit. Back in the carriage house, the room remained still. Michael turned to Eliza. He thinks he won. She nodded, fire burning in her eyes. Let him believe it a little longer. Because very soon, the man who tried to steal her identity would realize. He never understood who he was dealing with. The screen in front of Eliza flickered as Stein and Daniel descended into the lowest level of her Victorian home, the cellar. This wasn't just a basement. It was a vault of memories. Generations of the Parker family were archived here, framed photographs, restoration journals, letters written during wartime, even the original architect sketches from 1892. It was the heart of her history. Now it was under siege. Everything here goes, Daniel said flatly, lifting a dusty ledger with gloved hands. All of it. Stein, silent and efficient, scanned the room with a forensic eye. His gloved fingers brushed across an old wooden crate labeled Parker Family Archive, pried it open, and began extracting documents. These are originals, he muttered. They'll have to be destroyed, not just relocated. Eliza's fists clenched as she watched through the surveillance feed. Her breath grew shallow. This wasn't business for them. It wasn't legal maneuvering. This was a calculated erasure of identity. Make sure the photographs are removed, Daniel added. No visual links to the family. No trace she ever had a legitimate claim to this house. In another feed, Stein rolled up a floor plan from 1923, the one her grandmother had fought to preserve through a city zoning battle. He folded it like scrap paper, tossed it into a satchel, and moved on. Michael leaned toward Eliza, whispering, They're not just stealing from you. They're trying to eliminate the idea of you. She nodded slowly, emotion burning behind her eyes. They want to rewrite history. And I'm the last page they can't turn. Upstairs, Daniel began pacing again, agitated. His phone buzzed. The feed showed him glancing at the screen, then muttering into the receiver. We're almost done here. Everything will be processed by tomorrow. She's still unaware. Lie after lie. The plan was simple. Steal the identity, sell the asset, erase the origin. But Daniel didn't realize he'd already stepped into the trap. Let them finish, Eliza said quietly. Let them think they succeeded. Because with every document they touched, every folder they packed, and every memory they tried to destroy, they were building the case against themselves. Outside, federal agents were tailing the vehicles. The storage facility Daniel had arranged was already under surveillance. The warehouse Stein would later visit had a tracking beacon embedded in every stolen file. This wasn't just about one woman and one home anymore. It was a federal operation, and the evidence was stacking higher by the hour. Eliza turned to Michael. "When this ends," she said, her voice calm but laced with fire, "they won't just lose what they stole. They'll lose everything they ever thought they could get away with." The trap was set. Every surveillance feed was live. Every agent was in position. And the final countdown had begun. Eliza stood in the heart of the Federal Operations Center, surrounded by a sea of monitors and agents, all waiting for her signal. She was no longer the betrayed fiancé. She was the architect of justice, ready to collapse the world Daniel had built on lies. On screen, Daniel was leaving their condo, briefcase in hand, headed to her law office, completely unaware that he was walking into a federal sting. Target 1 in motion, Special Agent Rivera confirmed. Vehicle is en route to the office building. Simultaneously, another team tracked Stein, now arriving at the Oakland storage facility. He'd scheduled a document purge for that morning, one final step to wipe Eliza's legacy from existence. But instead, he was about to be caught red-handed. Team Bravo, hold until Daniel enters the premises, Rivera ordered. Wait for full confirmation of attempted access with falsified credentials. The seconds ticked like hours. Then, Daniel stepped through the glass doors of Eliza's firm, confidently swiping a badge that had already been flagged. Access denied, the security system chirped. He froze. That was the moment. Go. Within seconds, a team of federal agents surrounded him. Eliza watched on the feed as Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, panic. Daniel Mercer, an agent, barked. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and money laundering." Daniel tried to speak, the same charming protest he'd likely rehearsed for years, but the evidence was already overwhelming. His briefcase was confiscated. The hidden flash drive inside would only add to the mountain of charges. Simultaneously, over in Oakland, agents breached the storage facility. Jacob Stein had begun shredding documents when the steel door slammed open. Federal agents. Step away from the equipment. Caught mid-act, he raised his hands slowly, the faintest flicker of calculation in his eyes. But it was too late. Surveillance captured every movement. Every file he'd touched was now in custody. Back in the command center, cheers didn't erupt. There was no celebration. Just a deep, collective breath, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of accountability. Linda, the assistant U.S. attorney, turned to Eliza. "We recovered everything. Originals, photos, files, even your grandmother's journal. Nothing was lost." Eliza closed her eyes, just for a moment. Relief rippled through her. Not just for herself, but for every woman Daniel had targeted before her. He'd thought they were disposable. He'd thought he was untouchable. But now he was in custody, and his empire of fraud was crumbling around him. As Daniel was escorted into a federal vehicle, his eyes briefly met the nearby surveillance lens, and though he didn't know it, Eliza was on the other end, watching. This time, she wasn't the one being fooled.
He was.
Hours after Daniel's arrest, Eliza sat in the observation room of the Federal Detention Center, staring through the one-way glass. On the other side sat the man who had once whispered dreams of a future into her ear. Now, he sat handcuffed to a metal table, hollow-eyed and twitching, no longer the confident, tailored figure who had charmed his way into her life, but a man stripped of his illusions. Special Agent Rivera entered quietly, handing Eliza a thick folder. "Preliminary forensic audit is complete," he said, "and it's worse than we thought." She opened the folder, eyes narrowing as the figures came into view. More than $4.2 million had been personally funneled to Daniel from previous victims, women like Ellen Whitaker, Rebecca Chambers, and now, Eliza herself. The trail snaked through shell companies, bounced off offshore accounts, and landed in clean investments, luxury properties, startup shares, fine art. It was a perfectly constructed illusion of success, built entirely on other people's lives. "What about Kazarian?" Eliza asked. Rivera nodded grimly. "We've connected Daniel directly to Kazarian's laundering operation. He wasn't just moving money. He was structuring deals, acquiring assets, and identifying victims who could serve as gateways to wealth." A cold chill settled into her spine. So she hadn't just been targeted for her real estate holdings. She'd been used as a financial mule to clean millions in criminal proceeds. "He had help," Rivera added. "We've confirmed cooperation from at least 3 legal insiders and 2 offshore bankers. This wasn't just fraud, it was organized financial crime." Eliza turned her gaze back to the glass. Daniel was talking now, rapidly, nervously. He leaned forward, trying to charm his way through the initial questioning. But the agents remained silent. They didn't need words, they had the evidence. And Daniel had nowhere left to run. "How much of his life was real?" she asked quietly. Rivera didn't flinch. "None of it. The designer watches, the penthouse view, the Ivy League investment jargon, all funded by a trail of heartbreak, deceit, and ruined lives. And now it was all gone. His bank accounts frozen. His assets seized. His allies either arrested or preparing to flip. He hadn't just been a liar or a thief. He was a predator, meticulous, manipulative, and highly connected. But now, the net had finally closed around him." Eliza stood, smoothing her blazer, her expression unreadable.
"Let him talk," she said.
"Let him try to save himself." Then she turned to leave, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind her, Daniel continued his desperate performance. But for once, no one was listening, not to believe him, only to make sure he never hurt anyone again. It was nearly dusk when Eliza Parker returned to her Victorian home for the first time since the sting. The ornate gate creaked open, and she stepped through, her heels crunching softly against the gravel path. The house stood still, bathed in gold from the setting sun, a majestic silhouette that had weathered storms and betrayal. But this time, it had survived something far more insidious. Inside, everything had been cataloged and restored. The federal evidence team had meticulously documented every item stolen, every document tampered with. And now, the home stood exactly as it had before Daniel tried to erase it, perhaps even stronger. Her grandmother's portrait, the one Daniel had wrapped up like a pawn in a property trade, had been recovered and returned to its rightful place above the fireplace. Eliza stared at it for a long moment, tears prickling behind her eyes. "You were always right about people, Grandma," she thought. "I just learned it the hard way." In the study, the shelves had been restocked with family records, some recovered, some duplicated from certified copies. The journals, the photographs, the legal documentation establishing the home's historic value, all back where they belonged. Eliza ran her fingers over the antique desk that Daniel and Stein had rifled through just days earlier. It was a silent vow to herself. No one would ever violate this space again. But her fight hadn't ended with Daniel's arrest. In the days following the sting, she testified in closed-door sessions, helping federal prosecutors understand how Daniel's operation worked from the inside. Her knowledge of real estate law, digital records, and legal blind spots had proven invaluable. As a result, 3 more women across 2 states were identified as potential future victims, their assets safeguarded in time, their properties protected. Eliza didn't stop there. With Judge Montgomery's guidance, she proposed legislation for improved verification protocols in real estate transactions involving power of attorney and inherited assets. The motion gained traction, and soon, her work had not only dismantled a criminal empire, it had sparked systemic reform. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she wasn't a strategist or a witness or even a survivor. She was just Eliza, a woman reclaiming her name, her story, and her legacy. As she lit a single candle in the living room and poured herself a glass of wine, she allowed herself to exhale, fully, deeply, for the first time in weeks. She wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was restored. And for the first time in a long time, Eliza Parker sat in her home not as a victim of fraud, but as the woman who had taken down a man who thought he could erase her. He was wrong. She hadn't just survived him. She had ended him. Eliza Parker sat in a federal courtroom, her composure poised, her voice steady. The same voice that once convinced zoning boards and fought off predatory developers was now being used to bring down an empire of deceit. She was no longer telling her story just for herself. She was telling it for every woman Daniel had marked as vulnerable. Every detail she provided to the prosecution helped connect the dots, not just about Daniel, but about the vast network behind him. Real estate agents, paralegals, international financiers, and digital fraud experts had all played their part. And now they were falling one arrest at a time. It wasn't just personal betrayal, she told the grand jury. It was strategic, calculated, engineered to look legal, because Daniel and his partners knew where the loopholes were and how to exploit them. Her testimony was crisp, chronological, supported by evidence she and Michael Chen had painstakingly assembled. Surveillance footage, forged signatures, financial transfers. It was a blueprint of deception, now laid bare for a courtroom filled with legal firepower. Outside the courtroom, the headlines began to break. Luxury conman exposed, federal fraud ring tied to international money laundering. Victim turned whistleblower helps take down real estate fraud syndicate. Eliza didn't care about the media attention. She wasn't in it for sympathy or recognition. She was in it for accountability. Because justice wasn't just about punishing Daniel. It was about dismantling the system that let men like him thrive. The Treasury Department had already frozen over $40 million in assets. Prosecutors had begun targeting secondary players, the paralegals who looked the other way, the investment managers who moved dirty money through clean channels, the fake buyers who legitimized fraudulent property flips. Daniel's cooperation offer came too late. His attempt to portray himself as a misguided pawn fell apart when federal agents revealed the extent of his communications with Kazarian's network. They had messages, bank logs, and video evidence. Even his voice on tape, joking about how easy it was to play them all. The case had snowballed into one of the biggest white-collar criminal takedowns in the district's history, and Eliza had helped lead it. Later, in a private meeting with Judge Montgomery, Michael, and the lead prosecutors, she was handed a leather-bound folder, a thank you from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Inside were letters of commendation and a handwritten note from a woman in Chicago. You didn't just get justice for yourself. You helped give it back to all of us. Eliza closed the folder gently, holding back tears. She hadn't planned to become a symbol. But maybe, just maybe, it was time the world saw that smart, powerful women didn't just survive betrayal. They could turn it into justice. It started with a single voice, Eliza's. But within a week of her courtroom testimony going public, the silence began to break. Emails arrived, letters, anonymous tips, then full names, stories. One by one, more women stepped forward. A biotech executive from Seattle, a retired professor from Baltimore, a gallery owner in Austin. Each of them had met men like Daniel, charming, articulate, polished predators who walked into their lives offering partnership and romance, only to leave devastation in their wake. But now, with Eliza's courage lighting the path, these women were no longer afraid to speak. I thought I was alone, one wrote. I thought no one would believe me, until I saw your name. The FBI set up a special task force to investigate related cases. With Eliza's help, they refined a profile that exposed a pattern spanning 9 states, involving different Daniels, aliases, partners, shadows, all running the same operation under new names. And now, those shadows were being pulled into the light. Judge Montgomery presided over the closed-door coordination briefings, while Linda, the assistant U.S. attorney, assembled cross-jurisdictional teams to prosecute a growing ring of financial predators. This is more than justice, Eliza told the assembled panel one morning. This is about protecting women who were told their intelligence was a vulnerability. She wasn't just testifying anymore. She was advocating. She was leading. The national spotlight soon turned into something more powerful than headlines, a movement. Law journals published in-depth case studies. Advocacy groups requested Eliza to speak at their events. Universities invited her to teach modules on fraud prevention, financial abuse, and systemic accountability. The Parker Initiative was born from it, a nonprofit aimed at educating professional women on financial protection, legal literacy, and digital safety. Its launch event sold out in hours. Ellen Whitaker and Rebecca Chambers attended quietly, standing in the back, their eyes shining with quiet solidarity. Eliza spotted them from the podium. She didn't need to say their names to acknowledge them. They were proof that healing could begin again. Later that night, in the quiet of her Victorian, Eliza stood by the window with a cup of tea. The lights of the city shimmered just beyond the glass. It hadn't been easy. The betrayal, the humiliation, the violation of everything sacred to her. But she had survived. She had fought back. And in doing so, she had become the very thing Daniel never anticipated a reckoning. Because when women like Eliza Parker rise, they don't just rise alone. They bring others with them. And they never look back. The request came through Daniel's attorney. A formal letter, carefully worded, respectful in tone. My client wishes to meet with Miss Parker in person prior to his sentencing hearing. He believes there are unresolved matters between them that may offer closure. Eliza stared at the letter for a long moment. Closure? From the man who had spent 3 years forging his way into her life, only to attempt to erase her from it entirely? Still, she didn't tear the letter up. Instead, she forwarded it to Judge Montgomery, who ensured the meeting would happen under full federal supervision, recorded, with legal counsel and armed marshals present. This time, there would be no illusions of intimacy, no shadows to hide in. The detention center's interview room was sterile, gray, and humming faintly with fluorescent light. Eliza entered wearing a tailored navy suit, her posture upright, eyes calm but resolute. Daniel was already seated. Gone was the designer suit. Gone was the confidence. He looked smaller,
Gaunt.
but still trying to compose the same persuasive charm he'd always relied on. Eliza, he said, as if her name still belonged to him. She didn't reply. I suppose I should say I'm sorry, he began. She folded her hands on the table. Only if you mean it. Daniel paused. The act faltered. I didn't plan for it to go so far. I didn't mean to hurt you. She let the silence hang heavy between them before responding. You didn't just hurt me. You studied me. You planned every move. You targeted my family, my clients, and my home. I thought we had something real, he said quietly. Eliza leaned forward. You never wanted something real. You wanted something profitable. His gaze dropped, and for the first time, there was no quick retort. No smirk. No script. I want to make it right, he said. You can't, she replied. She stood, her voice steady and strong. But I can. And with that, she walked out, not looking back, not giving him the final word. An hour later, Daniel Mercer stood in front of a federal judge, flanked by agents, as his sentence was read aloud. 25 years in federal prison with no chance of parole for at least 18. Charges included wire fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft, interstate transportation of stolen property, and laundering funds for an international crime syndicate. Eliza wasn't in the courtroom.
She didn't need to be.
She already had everything she came for. Her home, her name, her voice, and justice, complete, uncompromising, and unforgettable. The kind of justice that didn't just punish. The kind that stopped predators in their tracks. Months had passed since the sentencing. Spring had returned to San Francisco, and with it, a new chapter in Eliza Parker's life. The Parker Initiative, now fully operational, had become more than a nonprofit. It had become a movement. Its workshops on financial self-defense, real estate transparency, and fraud detection had drawn professionals from across the country. Eliza herself had spoken at law schools, financial conferences, and women's leadership summits. But her favorite events were always the small, quiet ones, roundtable sessions where women shared their stories without fear, shame, or judgment. In those rooms, Eliza saw what Daniel had failed to understand. You can't erase women like her. You can't silence them with betrayal. You can't rob them of their future just because they trusted. In fact, it was their ability to trust, to love, to build, and to rise again that made them unbreakable. Back at her Victorian, the home she had once feared losing, peace had returned. It no longer felt haunted by what Daniel had tried to take. Instead, it radiated with purpose, restored, alive, and sacred. She'd recently converted the study into a quiet library and workspace for the initiative's research team. The walls, once ransacked, now held portraits of every Parker woman who had come before her, framed beside quotes about justice, resilience, and truth. One evening, as she locked up for the night, her phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca Chambers. "Another woman contacted me today. She heard our stories. She said she finally feels strong enough to speak out. I told her to call you. Hope that's okay." Eliza smiled. It was more than okay. This was the real justice. Not just the prison sentence. Not just the frozen accounts or the legal reforms. But the chain reaction of courage now rippling through boardrooms, courtrooms, and dining tables across the country. Women weren't whispering their stories anymore. They were declaring them. The next morning, Eliza stood on the steps of City Hall, preparing to give a speech on a new piece of legislation protecting victims of real estate and financial fraud. As the cameras rolled and the crowd leaned in, she looked out across the skyline of the city she loved. A city that had nearly taken everything from her. But instead, it had become the place where she reclaimed it all. Her legacy, her strength, her future. And now, as she spoke into the microphone, her voice rang clear and certain. They tried to erase us, but we are still here, and we are not going anywhere. Eliza Parker's story reminds us that even the most intelligent, experienced individuals can fall victim to manipulation when trust is weaponized. But more importantly, it shows that betrayal doesn't define us. Our response does. In a world where scams, fraud, and deception often go unpunished, Eliza's courage proves that truth, when pursued with resilience and the right support, can dismantle even the most sophisticated schemes. Her willingness to fight back not only reclaimed her life, but also protected others and sparked meaningful change. This journey teaches us that we must remain vigilant, not fearful, but informed. Whether it's in financial matters, personal relationships, or legal dealings, understanding our rights and recognizing red flags can be life-saving. Most of all, it reaffirms that justice is possible when good people stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced. If Eliza's strength resonated with you, or reminded you of someone you know, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another story that empowers and protects. Together, we learn. Together, we rise.